Hi, I'm Loretta, and I'm really glad that you showed up today. Welcome to my sewing room.
Okay, here we are, ready to start on block 4 of the Alaska Dahlia block of the month from Laundry Basket Quilts. So I've got my pieces arranged here out of the kit, and I've got them put together here the way they're going to go together for the quadrants. So this will be Unit A, Unit B, Unit C, and Unit D. And these units go together all the same way, and it's just the different color variations. So we're going to start with Unit A. That's these pieces here, and I'll meet you over at the sewing machine. So what I have here with me are the pieces for the star points and their matching triangles for Unit A. Once I get these two pieced and pressed, I'll add the extra triangle onto this dark one. So we're just going to start piecing, and these are just going to match up on this raw edge here. And we're going to match up at the top point here. See if I can get these to behave themselves. You're going to want to match this top point with this little flat point there, and down here this inside point is going to match up with this straight edge here. Get those in there. And again, my machine is set up with a 2.0 stitch length, and I am using a Bernina 790 Plus, and this is my 1/4 inch line. As I sew these, I'm going to do a scant quarter, which means I'm going to bring that fabric until that edge is right before that line. I can see that entire line there. And then I'll just feed the next piece through. And you could chain piece this entire block all in one step, but I actually kind of like to do it in quadrants because I want to make sure I've got my colors all in the correct place. Because if you don't get those right, the quilt won't really look right. So I'll get these two pressed, and then I'll add the triangle onto the other side, and be back in just a bit. And there's my two pieces with the seams pressed, and as before, I'm pressing all of my seams open for this particular quilt. And I press with a hot dry iron, no steam. Now you're going to do the same thing here. This point matches up on this long straight edge here. And your 1/4 inch is going to end in that little valley. Hopefully you see it better on this next piece. I like to piece this one from starting at the bottom and going up. And I think the key to this particular quilt is to make sure your seam allowance is correct, and when you're lining up these pieces to get them ready to stitch, making sure that you've got the correct that you're getting the correct point matched up with the long straight edge or another point. Alright, I'll get that pressed, and then we'll add that other triangle to the top of this darker one here. And here they are pressed. Seams are pressed open. I'm going to add this triangle to the top of this piece, the darker one. And on this one, what you're going to line up is this point here with that point there, and you're going to line up this whole long straight edge, and then on the other side, again, the same point. This point with the tip of this small blunt area there. So alright, press that one and be ready for the next one. You can see my point is nice and sharp there. And these pieces, as you're piecing them, when you're done, this top edge should be straight across and 1/4 inch from here to here. And now we're going to join those two pieces together. So right sides together. And this seam here and this seam here are going to line up. Match your raw edges down at the bottom. And at the top, this little valley is going to be where your 1/4 inch seam starts. Just lifted that up to make sure my seam is matched. And as I go across that bulk of those seams coming together, I let my presser foot lift up to release the pressure there and help those fabrics to relax so that they'll stay aligned. Okay, I'm going to press that seam open, and then Unit A will be finished. And now here are the pieces for Unit B. And notice that the diamonds for the 8-pointed star are the same, but on this one, this triangle, the light colored triangle, is a different fabric than this one, whereas in Unit A they were both the same. So just make sure you keep that straight as you're piecing these. Get those lined up. And I hope all of you are enjoying this quilt as much as I am. First time I've ever had the opportunity to do a pre-cut quilt, and it's kind of nice not having to cut all the pieces out. just get my packet in the mail and sit down and start sewing. This is the first time I've made the Alaska quilt as well, and I always thought it looked like a pretty involved quilt as far as the piecing being fairly complicated, but honestly it's pretty easy piecing. Everything is straight, there's no Y seams to deal with, and so it's really not a difficult quilt to make. It's goes together pretty easily. Alright, I will get those 2 seams pressed open and we will add the other 2 triangles. Okay, all pressed and ready to go. Make sure you're adding the correct small triangle, the lighter colored one, to the right piece. And also on this one, make sure you got them right sides together. So get that all lined up there. And if you've been watching some of my other series of videos, I've explained why I don't use pins very often. I really think they do more harm than good. They tend to distort the fabric. And I do sometimes use them in a critical area where I've really got to have something match up good. But I also find that clips work pretty well for that as well. So, there we go. Another scant 1/4 inch. And this end just, it looks like it's just a total mess, you know, that nothing matches up. But it's because you've got so many different angles lining up here. But as you come to the end here, you will notice that your 1/4 inch will end right in that valley there. Just remember it's a scant 1/4 inch and not a full 1/4 inch. Alright, get those pressed open and we'll add the other triangle where it belongs. Okay, those are pressed. And again, you can see my edges line up along here and here. So that's make sure you're checking that, because if they're not lining up and you've got this piece sticking out up here or something hanging out on the side here, you'll know that you haven't lined your pieces up correctly. And another thing to remember is when we're adding this very last triangle, it's always going to go on this dark block. So turn that over and line it up. I use my stiletto a lot too to help me get things put in place. Got just a little bit of bulk there, and again I just like to let my presser foot release the pressure there. Helps those fabrics relax back against each other. You get less puckering, and the pieces will not shift if you allow your fabrics to relax like that. Alright, get that one pressed open, and then we'll join those 2 blocks. And we'll move on to Unit C. Well, we're almost ready for Unit C. I need to join these together as well. And another thing to remember as you're putting these units together is when you join these larger triangles for the last step of each unit, the dark one goes on the left and this teal color one goes on the right. All right, so we'll match those seams up again. Match our points at the end. And also, if you're not getting matching, like when you match your seam, this point should also match up at the end, this blunt point. If it doesn't, then you're off somewhere in your seam allowance or your how you're lining up each piece. Okay, let's stitch from the bottom this time. Making sure I can see that line on the throat plate and checking as I approach that seam that those match, and releasing my presser foot as needed so that it will relax that pressure on those fabrics. Continue on with the scant quarter. All right, we'll get that one pressed and that will be Unit B completed. And I've got good matching there where my seams come together, and good point right there where those two seams come together. And now I have the pieces here that I'm going to need for Unit C, and we're going to go through exactly the same process. And I didn't get that one lined up quite good enough, so I am going to rip that out. So here we go. And actually, since we're doing this, I'll show you guys how I rip a seam out. So I go and loosen the first couple threads, pulling them out a stitch at a time, and then I turn it over and pull on that loose thread, and then I come down about 3 or 4 stitches and cut that thread and then pull the tail out. That loosens a few stitches on the next side, and I go down 3 or 4 stitches and cut it, and I keep just doing that back and forth. And what that does is I'm not left with any threads that I'm needing to get rid of. It leaves me with a nice clean piece where don't have a bunch of raggedy threads hanging out all over the place. So start over there. Much better. I also think that way of it ripping out is pretty quick too. Might take a few seconds more because I pull those threads out. But the other thing it does is it helps to not distort the edge where I'm pulling the stitches out. I don't want to pull on the fabric at all, because if I do that, I'm going to distort that edge, especially if it's a bias edge like these are. And ready to take those two to the ironing station and get them pressed. Okay, I am ready to add the next two triangles. Again, making sure I've got the right side of this dotted fabric. It's hard to tell on that one, for me anyway. Once I get it directly in the light, I can tell pretty good. All right, get that pressed. We'll add that next triangle. And those are all pressed. And once again, just double check to make sure all of your raw edges are aligned with each other. And now this is the corner triangle for Unit C. This time it's the dark one, but again it goes on this darker triangle. Line up all those corners. And once again with our scant 1/4 inch. When I get to that bulky part, I lift my presser foot. All right, get that one pressed, and then we'll join these two pieces to complete Unit C. Again, I'm going to check my point before I go press, and that's a really good point right there. So, getting close to the finish line here. And now we'll piece these together, and once again the darker one goes on the left. Just making sure my raw edges are all aligned. Okay, get that pressed, and that's Unit C finished. We'll move on to Unit D, and then we'll assemble the entire block together. And here are the pieces for Unit D. And once again, our piecing sequence is identical to all the previous units. Just remember to put the correct color of triangle on the correct color of diamond. Okay, press that and we'll move on to the next step. Okay, those are pressed, and we're ready to add the next triangle. And now I will add this last triangle to the top of the darker unit. Once again, lining up those outer points on both ends. Okay, just one more seam and we'll have all of our units completed. Okay, we'll be right back and join those two pieces together. And once again, I'm going to check this point to make sure it's good before I press. And once again, this darker piece goes on the left. So we'll put those together. Line up that point. And line up my seam. And stitch it all with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Stopping to make sure that my seam is lined up. And I see it starting to pucker there, so letting the pressure off. And once again, when I get to the end of that, I'm going to make sure my raw edges are lined up. As I come to the end, my stitch is going to land in that little valley there. Alright, press that seam open and then we'll put the quadrants of this block number 4 together. Alright, I've got all 4 quadrants here, so I'm going to piece the top 2 together, then the bottom 2 together, and we're almost finished with this block. So for both of these, I'm going to start at the 90-degree corner, which is the center of the block. Just make sure you're getting them put together correctly and sewing the correct seam. Once I get past that little bit of bulk, I will let that pressure relax. Your seams here should match. Okay, now that I'm there, let my presser foot up and then get the rest of those edges lined up. And then here on the other end, you've got this little tiny piece of a dog ear hanging out below this upper triangle, and you're just going to match this edge on top of that. Continue on, and your seam is going to end in that little tiny valley there. And then we'll get the bottom 2 pieces, put those together, again starting at what will become the center of the block, where those edges form basically a 90-degree corner. And same thing, I'm going to make sure that that seam matches. And down here at the other end, I'm going to do the same thing. line up those two little tiny dog ear ends hanging out. Continue on with the scant quarter inch seam allowance. And once again, your seam is going to end in that little valley. All right, we'll get those pressed, and then one more seam, and this block is finished. Okay, now we have here two halves of the block. Top half has the light corner triangles, the bottom half has the dark corner triangles. Just going to line these up, match that center seam, and I am going to use a clip. You do want to either clip or pin that just to make sure that that center seam matches. And line up all the raw edges. Your sort of dog ear pieces should all match up as well. Take that clip out, and I'm going to hold those points together with my stiletto. It looks like I've had just a tiny bit of stretching on this top darker piece, but I have this machine has an integrated walking foot, so it will help evenly feed these fabrics. But also, as I stitch along, if I let that pressure release every couple of stitches, it'll help ease that tiny little bit of stretching in. All right, lining up my next section. And there we are at the end of that seam. And I will press that open, and then we'll lay it out on the cutting table and show you the finished block. Okay, here we are with the finished block number 4 for the Alaska Dahlia block of the month. And I'm really happy with how this came out. I've got good matching on my points, and in the center it all comes together nicely. I've got my seams neatly pressed on the back, and it comes out to the correct size. So 4 of those, and that is month 4 of the Alaska block of the month. Hope you've enjoyed this little tutorial, and if you have, please like, share, and subscribe. I really appreciate that, and we'll see you next month. Thank you. Bye.